The wind rolled across the borderlands like a whisper from another world, dry, sharp, and heavy with the scent of gunpowder and rain. By the time Ezekiel Marsh reached the ridge above his ranch, the storm had already broken. Lightning cut through the sky, illuminating the land below, wild, endless, and cruelly beautiful. That's when he saw them. Two figures slumped against a fallen pine near the creek, half hidden in the shadows. Their skin was streaked with blood and mud, and their bodies, massive, powerful, looked carved from the land itself. Apache women, warriors, giants in both stature and spirit. Ezekiel's first instinct was to turn his horse around. A white man helping wounded Apaches. That was suicide. Federal scouts roamed these lands, and vengeance burned hot after last month's raid. But something in the way one of the women stirred, slow, pained, refusing to fall, froze him in place. He dismounted, boots sinking into the wet dirt. "Easy now," he murmured, approaching with hands raised. "Ain't here to finish what someone else started." The taller of the two lifted her head, eyes like storm clouds meeting his. She gripped a crude knife, the blade trembling in her bloodied hand. "Go," she hissed in broken English. "You die if you stay." Ezekiel almost smiled. "Lady, I die if I go too. You're bleeding out." She didn't answer. The other, younger, maybe her sister, had gone still, her breath shallow. Ezekiel knelt, tearing a strip from his coat to wrap the wound. The first warrior's knife never lowered, but when she saw his hands, gentle, steady, working fast, her gaze shifted. Wariness became something else. Curiosity, maybe, or disbelief. Hours passed. He dragged them both to the cabin through the rain, firelight flickering against their soaked skin. He stitched, cleaned, bandaged, all while waiting for a bullet or an arrow through the wall. None came. When dawn broke, the smaller sister stirred. The taller one, the leader, sat upright, watching Ezekiel like a hawk. "Why?" she asked finally. He paused, tying the last knot of linen. "Because no one else would." For a long time, she said nothing. Then, slowly, she reached toward her sister, brushed a strand of wet hair from her face, and whispered a name, Ayana. Ezekiel nodded. "She'll live." The warrior's eyes met his again, still fierce, but softer now. "I am Tala," she said. "You are a fool." Ezekiel chuckled, wiping sweat from his brow. "Maybe, but I'm your fool now." Outside, the wind carried away the last of the rain. Inside, three strangers shared a silence thick with exhaustion and something else, the fragile beginning of trust. What none of them knew was that the storm outside was nothing compared to the one riding toward them at dawn. The rain had stopped by morning, leaving their earth soaked and shining under pale sunrise. Steam rose from the wet ground as Ezekiel stepped outside, his boots sinking slightly into the mud. The air smelled of wet wood and horses. Inside the cabin, Ayana and Tala slept lightly, their breathing slow but alert, even in rest. He could still hear the faint rustle of movement, warriors who never truly let their guard down. Ezekiel rubbed his eyes, exhaustion pulling on him like gravity. The bandages he'd wrapped around Ayana's arm were soaked through, but the bleeding had stopped. He had done what he could. He wasn't sure whether he had saved them or signed his own death warrant. He turned toward the barn when he heard it, the low thunder of hooves, dozens of them. His heart skipped a beat. Dust began to rise in the distance, and within moments, dark shapes took form, riders, fast, deliberate, and closing in. He ran back inside. "They're coming," he said, voice low but sharp. Tala was already on her feet, eyes fierce and cold as river stones. She reached for her spear and took position near the doorway. Ayana tried to stand, wincing but refusing to sit still. Through the window, Ezekiel could now see them clearly, Apache warriors, painted and armed, their horses restless and gleaming with sweat. But mixed among them rode federal marshals, men in dusty coats and badges that caught the sunlight. The sight twisted something deep inside him. "Why both?" Ezekiel muttered. "What kind of deal is this?" Outside, The riders slowed, forming a semicircle around his property. A man with a feathered headdress rode forward, his posture regal, his eyes unreadable. Beside him, a U.S. Marshal adjusted his hat, his face pale and tense. The chief raised his hand. "You have taken what is not yours, rancher," he said, voice carrying across the yard. "To daughters of the blood. You will return them now." Ayana's voice, calm but firm, echoed from behind Ezekiel. "He saved us. He owes no blood." The chief's gaze hardened. The law of blood does not bend to mercy. The marshal beside him spoke next, his voice cutting like a knife. "Those women are wanted for murder. Mars, you harbor them. You hang with them." Ezekiel's jaw tightened. His fingers brushed the revolver on his hip, not out of threat, but instinct. His voice was steady when he finally spoke. "They were dying. I did what any man with a soul would have done." The chief looked at him long and hard, then turned to his warriors. "Prepare the circle." The words sent a chill down Ezekiel's spine. A circle, not a battle, but judgment. He stepped forward, rainwater dripping from the cabin's roof, soaking his shoulders. "Then let me stand in it too," he said. The chief's eyes narrowed. "You would claim the blood of my daughters." Ezekiel nodded slowly. "If that's what it takes to make this right." The circle was drawn in silence. The Apaches dismounted, their movements deliberate, heavy with meaning. Horses snorted and pawed at the mud, while men and women formed a wide ring round the cabin. In the center stood Ezekiel, his hat low against the light, his hands empty, his heart pounding like a drum. Across from him, the chief, Nantan-Kai, began to speak in his native tongue, words rolling like the wind over stone. Tala translated under her breath, her deep voice steady. "He calls on the spirits to see truth, to weigh blood and honor." Ezekiel's gaze drifted to Ayana. She sat on the porch, her arm freshly bandaged, her dark eyes fixed on him. For the first time since he found her, there was no fear, no suspicion, only a quiet ache, something close to sorrow. The chief stepped closer. "You say you acted from mercy," he said in English now. "Mercy is not a thing that lives long on the border." Ezekiel's jaw tightened. "Maybe not, but I reckon it's still worth something." Nantan-Kai studied him, eyes narrowing. Then he took a knife from his belt and cut a thin line across his own palm. Blood welled instantly, red against the bronze of his skin. "Among my people, blood decides truth. Will you match it, white man?" Ezekiel didn't hesitate. He drew his own knife, dragged the blade across his palm, and held it out. Blood dripped into the mud, mingling with the chief's. The crowd murmured, shifting. Tala took a step forward, her expression unreadable. "By this, he shares your blood, Nantan. He cannot be enemy now." The marshal who had come with them spat into the dirt. "That's superstition," he snapped. "The U.S. government don't answer to ghost laws." The Apache warriors turned toward him as one, their eyes like burning coal. The chief raised his hand, silencing them. "Then perhaps your government should learn the price of peace," he said coldly. He turned back to Ezekiel. "You have spilled blood for my daughters. Then you are of my blood now. But understand this, what is taken cannot be half given." Ezekiel frowned. "What do you mean?" The chief looked toward Ayana. "She will decide if your blood stands or falls." Ayana rose slowly, her body trembling with pain and exhaustion. Her sister reached out to steady her, but she brushed the hand away. She stepped into the circle, the earth soft beneath her feet. For a moment, the world was silent, only the sound of wind through the hills. Then she spoke, not to her father, not to the tribe, but to Ezekiel. "You risked your life for me, for us. You did not ask who we were. You just acted." He met her gaze, saying nothing. Ayana took the knife from the chief, pressed it into her own palm, and drew blood. Then she lifted her hand, pressed it against Ezekiel's. Their blood mixed, red on red, skin to skin. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Nantan-Kai's expression changed, not anger, not approval, something older. "So be it," he said finally. "Blood calls to blood. Let it be honored." For the first time in days, the valley was silent. The rain had passed, and sunlight cut through the mist like a slow-moving blade. The air smelled of smoke and wet pine. Ezekiel stood outside the cabin, a half-broken shovel in his hands, turning the damp soil where his fence had collapsed. His thoughts were as heavy as the ground beneath him. Behind him, the door creaked open. Ayanna stepped out, her arms still wrapped in rough cloth. Her dark hair caught the light, glistening with the faint gold of morning. She watched him work in silence for a moment before speaking. "You build again," she said softly. He didn't look up. "Always something to mend around here." She tilted her head. "In my tribe, when something breaks, we ask if it is meant to stay broken." Ezekiel paused, leaning on the shovel. He finally met her gaze, the corners of his mouth lifting slightly. "Guess I ain't that good at letting go." Ayanna smiled faintly, then looked toward the hills. "My father says you are of our blood now." Ezekiel's tone hardened, though not unkindly. "Seems like that's caused more trouble than peace." "He gave you protection," she said, her voice carrying both pride and warning. "But not all well honored. Some call you thief, others call you fool." He nodded slowly. "Wouldn't be the first time." The conversation faded into quiet again. The two stood side by side, the sound of wind brushing through the grass around them. Inside the cabin, Tala was moving, sharpening blades, cleaning bandages, tending to the horses. Her movements were purposeful, but her eyes carried something restless, almost hunted. She could feel what Ayanna and Ezekiel both sensed. The calm wouldn't last. By noon, the air had changed again. The wind came from the west, hot and dry, carrying the smell of gunpowder and iron. Ezekiel looked toward the horizon and saw what he's got already: new riders again. Not Apache this time, not marshals either. These men rode without formation, their silhouettes jagged and mean. Bounty hunters. Ayanna noticed his stillness and followed his gaze. Her hand instinctively went to the knife at her belt. "Your people?" she asked. He shook his head. "No, worse." He grabbed his rifle from the porch and checked the chamber. "They're coming for the reward. The marshals must have sent word." Ayanna stepped forward. "Then we fight." Ezekiel looked at her, the bandage on her arm, the fire in her eyes, and felt a flicker of something dangerous, something real. "Not unless we have to," he said quietly. "I've had enough blood in the dirt for one lifetime." But as the first rifle crack echoed across the valley, he knew peace was over. The gunshot shattered the stillness like glass. Ezekiel ducked behind the trough as splinters of wood burst into the air. "Down!" he shouted. Ayanna darted back into the cabin, dragging the door shut behind her. Another shot rang out, this one closer, tearing through the porch post. Inside, Tala was already moving, calm, efficient, deadly. She grabbed the longbow from her pack and strung it with practiced ease. "For riders," she said through the crack in the shutter. "To behind the rocks. To coming from the creek." Ezekiel loaded his rifle and took position by the window. "They think I'm hiding outlaws," he muttered. "Guess they're not wrong." Ayanna crouched beside him, her knife ready. Her injured arm trembled, but her eyes burned. "You saved us. We stand with you now." Ezekiel glanced at her, the stubborn courage in her face. The dirt streaked across her cheek, and gave a single nod. "Then let's make it count." The next shot came from the creek. Ezekiel fired back. The echo rolled through the valley, bouncing off stone and pine. Tala's arrow followed, swift and silent, striking one of the riders square in the shoulder. He fell hard, disappearing into the grass. The others pulled back, shouting to one another in anger. A bullet slammed into the side of the cabin, scattering dust and splinters. Inside, smoke from the lantern mixed with gunpowder, filling the air with a sharp, choking haze. Ezekiel reloaded fast, sweat running down his temple. "They'll circle around," he said. "Try to set fire to the barn." "I'll stop them," Tala said simply, already moving toward the back door. Ayanna caught her arm. "You're still weak?" Tala's expression softened just for a heartbeat. "So are you, little sister. But weakness don't stop blood." She slipped outside before Ayanna could protest. From his window, Ezekiel saw her dart between the shadows, silent as a hawk. A shot rang out, then another. For a moment, nothing. Then he saw a figure collapse near the fence, and Tollery appeared, limping but alive. The hunters regrouped, shouting now, their leader's voice rising above the noise. "We'll burn you out, Mars. You and those savages both." Ezekiel's jaw clenched. He fired again, his bullet hitting the man's head clean off. "You can try," he growled. Flames flickered in the distance. They'd thrown torches toward the barn. Ayanna rushed to the door, but Ezekiel caught her arm. "Wait, if we run out, we're dead." Her voice trembled, more with fury than fear. "That barn has your horses, your life." He looked at her, really looked at her, and nodded. "Then we take it back." Together they burst through the door, smoke swirling around them, the sun low and red behind the hills. Bullets tore through the air. Ayanna moved like wind, knife flashing, while Ezekiel's rifle cracked thunder. The barn fire roared higher, but so did their well. By morning, the smoke had thinned to gray ribbons floating above the valley. The barn still smoldered, its frame blackened and weak. Ezekiel leaned against a fence post, staring at the charred remains. His shirt was torn, his hands blistered from the fight, but his eyes were sharp, calm in a way that came only after surviving chaos. Inside the cabin, Tala sat with her legs stretched out, wrapping it tightly with a strip of cloth. Ayanna knelt beside her, grinding herbs in a small clay bowl. The smell of sage and pine filled the air. "Hold still," Ayanna murmured. Tala grunted. "I've been shot before, sister. This is nothing." Ayanna glanced at her, a faint smirk on her lips. "You always say that right before you pass out." Ezekiel stepped inside, wiping sweat and soot from his forehead. "We'll need to ride out soon. They'll send more men once the word spreads." Ayanna looked up, her voice calm but firm. "You mean the marshals?" He nodded. "Them, or worse. The kind that don't ask for bounty, just blood." Tala tightened the bandage and stood, testing her weight. "Then we ride fast. Far." Ezekiel crossed his arms. "And go where? Your people think I stole you. The law thinks I'm hiding murderers. Every mile we ride, we make new enemies." Silence filled the cabin. Outside, the wind brushed through the half-burned barn, whistling through the gaps like a distant lament. Ayanna finally spoke. "Then we stop running. We make them come to us." Ezekiel frowned. "That's not a plan. That's suicide." Her eyes flashed. "It's life. My father will not abandon me. He will come, and he will bring the old ways. The law of blood you accepted still protects you." Ezekiel's brow furrowed. "That protection won't mean a damn thing if the government sends soldiers. You think they'll honor Apache laws?" Ayanna didn't answer. Instead, she rose and stepped closer, her presence calm but commanding. "Then we'll teach them a new one." For a long moment, they stood in silence, two stubborn souls, cut from the same scarred earth, staring at each other like reflections. Then Ezekiel exhaled, slow and tired. "You sound like my kind of trouble." Ayanna's lips curved just slightly. "You already chose trouble when you picked up that shovel, rancher." Outside, a hawk screamed high above the valley. The sound cut through the quiet like a warning. From the ridge to the east, a dust trail began to rise, faint but certain. Tala turned toward the window, her eyes narrowing. Riders again. Not Apache this time. Ezekiel's jaw tightened. He grabbed his rifle and stepped toward the door. "Then we'd better see who's come to finish the job." By noon, the dust trail had turned into men. 5 riders, their coats long and dark, badges catching sunlight like broken mirrors. Federal marshals. Their horses moved in silence, their faces carved from suspicion and long miles on the road. Ezekiel stood by the gate, rifle resting across his arm but not raised. Beside him, Ayanna and Tala watched from the porch, motionless, unreadable. The wind carried the smell of ash and blood. The man at the front dismounted first. His face was narrow, his mustache trimmed sharp as his words. "Ezekiel Mars," he called, voice steady but heavy with authority. "By federal order, You're to surrender immediately for aiding and abetting fugitives, wanted for the murder of 2 settlers near the New Mexico line. Ezekiel's jaw flexed. You rode a long way just to say something you already know ain't true. The marshal's eyes flicked to Ayanna and Tala. Those women standing behind you, they're killers. Doesn't matter what name you've given in here. We've got witnesses, bodies, and orders. Don't make this hard. Ayanna took one step forward. The movement alone made the marshals tighten their grips. We defended ourselves. They came to our camp to steal our horses. My sister warned them. They drew first. Save it, the marshal snapped. You're not under tribal law here. Ezekiel raised his voice just enough to carry. She's under my protection. That means she's under my blood. You step through that gate, you're breaking more than the law, you're breaking a vow between nations. For a second, silence fell. The marshals exchanged looks. The lead officer frowned. That Apache ritual your kind took part in, it's superstition, Mars. It doesn't hold in a federal court. Ezekiel's voice dropped low, rough. Maybe not in court, but out here. He nodded toward the hills, where the land rolled vast and wild. Out here, it holds just fine. The marshal exhaled, frustrated. You're making a mistake, son. Ezekiel stepped forward, rifle still down but firm in his grip. I made it the day I didn't walk away from to dying women. You want to call that a crime, you'll have to make it stick. From the porch, Tala's voice cut through the air, cold and steady. You have 5 men. We have 50 eyes watching from the ridge. The marshals froze. For the first time, their confidence faltered. They turned slightly, scanning the horizon. The hills looked empty, silent, but the tension in the air said otherwise. Ezekiel didn't move. I suggest you ride home. Tell your bosses the border's got a new law now. One that don't answer to greed. The lead marshal stared at him for a long moment, his jaw working, then spat into the dirt. This ain't over, Mars. Ezekiel nodded. It never is. They mounted up and rode off, dust curling behind them like ghosts. When they were gone, Ayanna stepped down from the porch. 50 eyes, she said softly, a flicker of amusement in her tone. Tala smirked faintly. The sun hung low over the prairie, swollen and red like a wound refusing to heal. The world around the ranch seemed quiet, too quiet. After the marshal's visit, silence had settled like dust. Every sound felt heavier, the creak of wood, the whisper of the wind, even the steady rhythm of Ayanna's breath as she mended a torn saddle strap beside the porch. Ezekiel worked near the corral, repairing the fence the storm had split days before. His shirt clung to his back, the dry air burning his throat. Still, his hands moved with calm precision, the kind that comes from years of living on the edge where routine meant survival. Tala was the first to notice the rider, a small dark figure on the horizon, moving fast, too fast for a neighbor. She rose slowly, her body tense, one hand already near the old Winchester that leaned against the porch rail. Ezekiel straightened, squinting into the light. You seein' what I'm seein'? Single rider, Tala said, carrying something. Not armed. The horse came closer, a thin bay, foam along its neck. The rider was a boy, maybe 16, wearing a dusty government vest. He pulled up at the gate, barely catching his breath before reaching into his saddlebag. Letter for Ezekiel Mars, the boy said, voice cracking with nerves. Signed and sealed by the Federal Office of Frontier Affairs. Ayanna and Tala exchanged looks. Ezekiel walked over, took the envelope, and studied the dark red wax. The seal shimmered faintly in the light, the eagle of the Union, surrounded by a ring of stars. He tore it open slowly. The words were short. Cole, official, Mr. Ezekiel Mars, you are hereby summoned to appear before the Territorial Office in Santa Fe to account for your actions in aiding fugitives under federal investigation. Failure to comply will result in forfeiture of property and arrest. You are expected within 7 days. Signed, Marshal J.T. Crow. The paper crumpled slightly in his hand. Ayanna stepped closer, her brow furrowed. What does it say? Ezekiel hesitated. Then, quietly, it says the law still remembers me. Tala frowned. Then we leave. We take the horses and head south. There's shelter in the canyon tribes. He shook his head. They'll follow. And if I run, they'll call me guilty. If I go, maybe I buy us time. Ayana's voice lowered, almost trembling. And if you don't come back? He looked at her then, really looked. The firelight from the setting sun caught in her dark eyes. Then you keep this place alive, he said softly. You and your sister. You keep what we built. The words hung there, heavy and sacred. The boy lingered awkwardly, shifting in his saddle. Ezekiel handed him a few coins and nodded toward the trail. Get home before dark, son. Night came quietly, draping the plains in silver and silence. The sky was clear, a black ocean pricked with stars so sharp they looked like they could cut. Crickets sang somewhere beyond the barn, their rhythm soft, steady, almost human in its persistence. Inside the cabin, a small lamp flickered, its flame trembling with every breath of wind, sneaking through the cracks in the old wood. Ezekiel sat at the table, the federal letter unfolded before him, its neat handwriting glowing faintly in the lamplight. He'd read it 5 times. The words didn't change, but something in him did. Each reading peeled another layer of peace from his chest. Ayana moved quietly behind him, her hair loose, her eyes reflecting the golden flame. You don't have to go, she said softly. Not alone. He smiled without joy. If I don't, they'll come for what's mine, and that means this place. You, the land. Tala stood near the doorway, her arms crossed. Maybe it's time they see what happens when they push too far. Ezekiel shook his head. If it comes to fighting, they'll call it proof. I go, maybe I keep blood off the ground, at least for now. A silence stretched between them, filled with the sound of the wind pressing against the walls. Then a sound, faint, distant, rhythmic. Hoofbeats. Tala reached for her rifle without a word. Ayana's eyes sharpened. Ezekiel rose, lantern in hand, and stepped out into the cold desert air. From the darkness came a single rider, cloaked and silent. No badge, no light, only the soft gleam of painted horsehide and the faint scent of sage. The rider dismounted, pulling back his hood. It was Tasa, the old shaman, who had presided over the blood oath weeks ago. His face, lined and scarred by years of sun and sorrow, held the calm of someone who carried messages between worlds. Brother of our blood, Tasa greeted, voice low and steady. I come with words not written, but spoken. Ezekiel nodded, motioning him inside. Tasa entered slowly, his steps soft, his eyes scanning the cabin. He looked at the sisters, then to Ezekiel. The chief has learned what the marshals plan, Tasa said. They do not want you tried. They want you gone. Dead, if the wind favors them. The order was sent from higher men, those who fear the peace you built. Tala clenched her fists. Then we ride tonight. Strike first. But Tasa shook his head. No, you cannot outrun paper. You cannot kill a word once it has been spoken in their courts. He turned to Ezekiel. The chief offers sanctuary. You, and those down to you, may cross into the canyon lands and live under our shadow. But if you choose this path, you do not return to this world again. Ayana stepped forward, her voice breaking slightly. He can't just disappear. They'll think he's gone, Tasa finished. Yes, but sometimes, to live, a man must die in name. The wind outside howled suddenly, rattling the door. The flame in the lamp wavered, casting long, distorted shadows across their faces. Dawn came quietly, not with the cry of birds, but with the deep, aching hum of the earth waking. A thin line of light bled over the horizon, touching the dry grass and the half-broken fence. The air was cool, heavy with dust, and the smell of rain that hadn't yet fallen. Ezekiel saddled his mare in silence. His hands moved slow, deliberate, the way a man prepares for something he knows he might not return from. Ayana tightened the straps on her horse beside him, her movements graceful but tense. Tala checked the rifles, her eyes scanning the horizon. They didn't speak, They didn't need to. Every look between them carried more than words could say. When the first beam of sunlight reached the edge of the canyon rim, a soft voice broke the stillness. "You ride under both skies now," said Tassa. He stood a few paces away, his cloak catching the wind. "The world of men behind you, the spirit lands ahead. Choose your steps wisely. The ground remembers what walks upon it." Ezekiel nodded. "We'll remember." The old shaman extended his hand. Ezekiel took it. For a brief moment, the light around them seemed to still, as if the world held its breath. Then, without another word, they rode. The land opened before them in waves of red and gold. The canyon stretched wide and endless, carved by centuries of wind and sorrow. The sound of their horses echoed off the stone walls, steady, powerful, alive. Ayana rode slightly ahead, her dark braid whipping in the wind. The rising sun painted her profile in fire, her eyes fixed forward. For the first time in days, she smiled, faint but real. Tala followed close, her rifle strapped across her back. "They'll come after us," she said over the wind. Ezekiel's voice was calm. "Then let him. We've got more miles than they've got courage." They laughed, short, sharp, but true. For a moment, they were not fugitives, not hunted, just souls moving through a world too wild to cage. But behind them, faint and distant, came the echo of hooves. Ezekiel turned in his saddle. Far beyond the rolling dust, he saw a shimmer, sunlight flashing on something metallic. Too far to tell, but close enough to feel it in his bones. "The marshals?" Ayana asked quietly. "Maybe," he said. "Maybe just ghosts." Tassa's words whispered through his mind. "The ground remembers what walks upon it." They pushed forward deeper into the canyon. The air grew cooler, the light softer. Strange markings appeared on the rock's spirals. Animal shapes, handprints from lives long gone. Ayana reached out, touching one of the symbols as they passed. Her fingers brushed the stone, and for a heartbeat, she felt it pulse, faintly, like the beat of a sleeping heart. Ezekiel looked back once more. The horizon behind them was burning orange. The ranch, just a speck swallowed by the sun. Ahead, the shadows of the canyon waited, vast and alive. He drew a slow breath. No turning back now. Ayana nodded. We weren't made for turning back. By noon, the canyon walls closed around them like the ribs of a sleeping giant. The air was cool and still, heavy with the scent of sage and stone. Streams trickled from the rocks, catching sunlight like shards of glass. Ezekiel slowed his horse. "This is it." Ayana nodded. "The canyon of silence. No one enters here unless they're called." Tala dismounted first, eyes narrowing at the carvings that lined the walls. They were older than memory's spirals, suns, hands reaching upward. Each mark seemed to glow faintly, as if the rock itself was breathing. From the shadows ahead, figures emerged, a circle of elders dressed in woven robes and eagle feathers. Their faces were painted in ash and ochre. At the center stood Tassa, holding a staff adorned with bones and turquoise. "You have crossed," he said. "Now the canyon must decide if you belong." Ezekiel dismounted, dust swirling around his boots. "What does that mean?" Tassa's gaze was steady. "Every crossing has a cost. The land remembers who you were." And it asked, "Are you worthy to become something new?" The elders began to chant, low, rhythmic. The sound vibrated through the air and into Ezekiel's chest. Ayana and Tala stood beside him, heads bowed. The canyon began to hum. A warm wind swept through, carrying dust and whispers. Ezekiel's vision blurred. The ground beneath him shimmered. He saw flashes. His burned barn, the marshal's cold eyes, Ayana bleeding beneath the open sky. His own hands covered in dust and blood. He fell to his knees. Ayana reached for him, but Tassa lifted a hand. He must walk the spirit path alone. Ezekiel's breath came hard. The visions grew sharper. He saw his father's ranch, the boy he once was, the life he'd buried under years of silence. Then, a light. It wasn't fire nor sun, but something softer. Ayana's voice. Somewhere deep inside the storm of his memories. "You didn't save us for guilt. You saved us because your heart refused to turn away. The wind stopped. The silence was total. When Ezekiel opened his eyes, he was standing again. The canyon was still. The elders watched him quietly. Tassa stepped forward. The land has spoken. You have left your name behind. Ezekiel blinked, confused. Then what am I now? The old shaman smiled faintly. You are what you chose, protector, husband, brother. The words are small. The spirit is large. Ayana walked to him, eyes glistening. Then it's done, she whispered. Tassa nodded once. It is done. You may live here, beyond the reach of their laws. The world will believe Ezekiel Mar's dead. The man who remains will belong to us. Tal exhaled, shoulders finally loosening. Then we build, she said. We make this place home. Ezekiel looked around, the red cliffs, the ancient symbols, the sky stretching wide above. He felt the pulse of the land beneath his boots, steady and alive. He took Ayana's hand. Home, he repeated softly.